Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhavavatadharaye cha ye chatan samanvataha Ashandinaste bhavantu Satchastra Paripantina. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 2, Text 28, and we will also be covering um, the next verse, Text 29 as well. So once again, Bhavavrata ye cha tan samanuvrata pashandinaste bhavantu satchastra paripantina. Synonyms: Bhavavrata Dara, Bhavavrata Dhara, no, Bhavavrata Dara, taking a vow to satisfy Lord Shiva. Ye, who, cha, and Ye, who, cha, and Tan, such principles. Samanu, Samanuvrata, following. Pashandina, atheists, they, Bhavantu, let them become. Sat Sastra Paripantina, diverted from transcendental scriptural injunctions. Sat Shastra Paripantina, diverted from transcendental scriptural injunctions. Translation: one who takes a vow to satisfy Lord Shiva or who follows such principles will certainly become an atheist and be diverted from transcendental scriptural injunctions. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. It is sometimes seen that devotees of Lord Shiva imitate the characteristics of Lord Shiva. For example, Lord Shiva drank an ocean of poison. So some of the followers of Lord Shiva imitate him and try to take intoxicants like ganja or marijuana. Here the curse is that if someone follows such principles, he must become an infidel and turn against the principles of Vedic regulation. It is said that such devotees of Lord Shiva will be Satchastra Paripantina, which means opposed to the conclusion of Shastra or Scripture. This is confirmed in the Padma Purana also. Lord Shiva was ordered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to preach the impersonal or Mayavada philosophy for a particular purpose, just as Lord Buddha preached the philosophy of voidness for particular purposes mentioned in the Shastras. Sometimes it is necessary to preach a philosophical doctrine which is against the Vedic conclusion. In the Shiva Purana, it is stated that Lord Shiva said to Parvati that in the Kali Yuga, in the body of a Brahmana, he would preach the Mayavada philosophy. Thus, it is generally found that the worshippers of Lord Shiva are Mayavadi followers. Lord Shiva himself says, Mayavadam achachutram achashastram asat shastra, as explained here, means the doctrine of Mayavada impersonalism or becoming one with the Supreme. So let me repeat that. Ashat Shastra, as explained here, means the doctrine of Mayavada impersonalism or becoming one with the Supreme. Brghu Muni cursed the persons who worshipped Lord Shiva would become followers of this Mayavada Ashat Shastra, which attempts to establish that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is impersonal. Besides that, among the worshippers of Lord Shiva, there is a section who live a devilish life. Srimad Bhagavatam and Narada Pancharatra are authorized scriptures that are considered Sat Shastra, or scriptures which lead one to the path of God realization. Asat Shastras are just the opposite. Moving on to the next verse, text 29. Nasta saucha mudha diyo Jata bhasmasti dharina vishantu shiva dikshayam yatra daivam surasavam. Nasta saucha, cleanliness being abandoned. Mudadhiya, foolish. Jata bhasma asti dharina, wearing long hair, ashes, and bones. Vishantu may enter. Shiva Dikshayam, into the initiation of worship of Shiva. Yatra, where Daivam are spiritual. Sura Asavam, wine and liquor. Translation: those who vow to worship Lord Shiva are so foolish that they imitate him by keeping long hair on their heads. When initiated into the worship of Lord Shiva, they prefer to live on wine, flesh, and other such things. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Indulging in wine and meat, keeping long hair on one's head, not bathing daily, and smoking ganja are some of the habits which are accepted by foolish creatures who do not have regulated lives. By such behavior, one becomes devoid of transcendental knowledge. In the initiation into the Shiva mantra, there are mudrikakshika, in which it is sometimes recommended that one make his sitting place on the vagina and thus desire nirvana or dissolution of existence. In that process of worship, wine is needed, or sometimes in place of wine, palm tree juice, which is converted into an intoxicant. This is also offered according to Shiva Agama, a scripture on the method of worshipping Lord Shiva. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna everyone, welcome for today's discussion on Canto 4, Chapter 2, Texts 28 and 29. So we're reflecting on these verses spoken by the great sage Brghu. And these verses appear in a moment of intense conflict. As we're reading through these verses, we're seeing the altercations, the interactions, the curses being hurled between these great personalities like Daksha and Nandishvara and Brghu Muni in this case. So, like all Bhagavatam narrations, they reveal deep spiritual truths that is meant to guide our own spiritual lives. Yeah, it's one thing watching the drama, but it is not like your routine TV sitcom or serial or show. But these are really, meant to imbibe in us and educate us and awaken, our understanding of what the spiritual truths are behind all of these, why these things happening. So that's what we need to take away from today's discussion. So the background, again, just for those who are, joining us for the first time here, the background begins with Daksha, who is a Prajapati, entering this great sacrificial arena. Okay, it was a sacrifice, 1,000-year sacrifice that was being organized by these three greats, Daksha, Marichi, and Vashishta. And present there was Lord Shiva. And along with Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma was there. There were other great personalities, great brahmanas who were present in this, sacrifice that was happening. Now, Daksha, as you can imagine, being a Prajapati, he was effulgent. He was very handsome. And when he entered, people's heads turned. And so when he entered the sacrificial arena, everybody stood up to offer their seat, they offer their respects to Daksha. But seated firmly were Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. Now, Lord Brahma is Daksha's father. But Daksha immediately turned towards Shiva, Shiva is Daksha's son-in-law. So he became, so Daksha became extremely perturbed that his son-in-law was not offering respects to him. And so he became offended and started severely criticizing Lord Shiva. And to make things worse, the altercation started, and then Brghu started, criticizing Lord Shiva as well and representing the Brahmanas. He became so angry that he started responding with counter curses. Okay, so that's the brief, and this interaction between Nandishvara, who also responded with curses as well. So all of this is happening, and Shiva gets completely disgusted. He just quietly gets up and walks out. Okay, so some of the key things I'd like to cover 3 points, and I'll walk us through those in detail. But there are three emerging, themes from, what we're reading in these two verses. So let's talk about the first one, where we're talking about such elevated souls, they're becoming influenced by anger. I mean, that is something unthinkable, you know. And when you're talking about Brigumani, in this case, in these two verses especially, Brigumani is not an ordinary person. He is one of the greatest sages in the universe. I mean, Brigumani is one of the Prajapatis. He's the great, the great progenitors of the universe. And he's a directly, born from the mind of Brahma. So Brigumani is considered one of the foremost authorities when it comes to dharma, when it comes to karma, when it comes to spiritual qualifications. He's even, regarded very highly as, the author of, the Vedic astrological tradition known as the Brghu Samhita. And Brghu Samhita is basically a compilation of karmic destinies of the soul, the complex laws of karma. So he represents Brahmanical authority. And then he also founded this great lineage called the Bhargava dynasty. And Bhargava dynasty is very well known. You have some of the best of the best, the most famous, personalities that we hear about, including Shukracharya, who was the guru of the demons. Bali, Bali Maharaj is, the whole Vamana pastime is so famous. And Shukracharya is standing right by the side of Bali Maharaj. So he was the guru of the demons. So Shukracharya was one of them. The other great personality that we know about is Parshuram, who is an incarnation of Lord Vishnu himself. So let's, just to, talk a little more about Brghu Muni. Here's a story, and like my Guru Maharaj would say, once upon a time, there's always a story, the stories always start with once upon a time. So here we go. So once upon a time, there was, a great gathering of personalities, an assembly of sages that were gathered on the banks of river Saraswati. And as they were discussing, the wonderful topics, this topic came up. Among these three great presiding deities, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, who is the supreme? Who possesses the highest transcendental qualities? Interesting question. And so they said, someone, we need to find that out. And who would be the right person? Who would be the right person to be able to find this out? And this is not an easy task. It's not an easy task. As simple as the question sounds, it's a very, very, very intricate and a very complex kind of a situation where that someone has to be fearless to be able to take some bold actions. Someone that is qualified, someone that is well grounded in the scriptures, someone that is well grounded in devotional qualities, and someone who could test them. Who can test Lord Shiva? Who can test Lord Brahma or even Lord Vishnu? Right? So it was a very, very difficult proposition, and unanimously they chose Brghu Muni. So Brghu Muni agreed. And he went. He went first to Satyaloka and met with Lord Brahma. And he entered, but he didn't offer any obeisances. He didn't offer his respects to Brahma. And Brahma was completely perturbed. Brahma is his father, of course, So Brahma said, hey, Brghu Muni, this is not right. This is being extremely disrespectful. So Brahma was furious. He was furious. But then Brahma controlled his anger. He didn't say anything per se, to Brghu Muni, but while his eyes glowed red, and he was very, very angry, he just restrained his anger, and Brghu left after that. So he left, but he was thinking to himself, saying, "Hey, Lord Brahma my father was angry, but it was controlled. It was controlled." So next he went to Kailash. He went to Kailash, and as you know, it's the abode of Lord Shiva. And there again, Lord Shiva, as usual, he was so overjoyed to see Brghu Muni that he offered his respects and honored him and welcomed him. And in stark contrast, Brghu Muni completely turned against him and said, "You and said a lot of harsh words. You who, associate yourself with these, goals and ghosts, and you're covered in ashes. You're such an impure person." So Lord Shiva was astonished, and quickly that turned into anger. And Lord Shiva was so furious, more furious than Lord Brahma. He actually raised his trident and was about to use it against Brghu Muni. But then Parvati Devi rushed into the scene and she calmed him down and said, "My dear Lord, please, please understand that this is Brghu Muni. He's a great personality, he's a great sage, he's a great devotee. Please don't harm him." So Shiva cooled down immediately. He was pacified. So Brghu left from Kailash, and this time he was thinking to himself, you know what? Shiva's anger was intense. He almost picked up the trident to come attack me. So thinking this way, he went to see Lord Vishnu in Vaikuntha. And there in Vaikuntha, Lord Vishnu was, relaxing. Lakshmi Devi was massaging his feet. And he was very peaceful. And what did Brghu Muni do? He rushed towards Lord Vishnu and kicked Lord Vishnu in the chest. He kicked Lord Vishnu in the chest. And so the entire universe held its breath. I mean, they were completely shocked. Everybody was shocked. Lakshmi Devi was shocked. How could anyone do this? I mean, you can't even imagine. I mean, someone had to have real guts to be able to do something like that and to have, to do something that was so unpredictable and unthinkable. It was just completely out of whack. But you know what? Lord Vishnu did something unimaginable. He immediately got up and with folded arms, folded hands, he approached Brghu Muni and he said, "My dear Brghu Muni, my chest is so hard. Your foot, your soft foot must have been hurt. Please let me massage your foot." And at that moment, Brghu Muni was completely melted. I mean, he was completely moved by Lord Vishnu's words and actions. So he came back. Brghu Muni came back. Long story short, to cut it short here, Brghu Muni came back to the sages and clearly announced. He said, "Look, here is the Supreme Lord. No pride, no envy, no anger, only humility, only compassion, and only love." So he declared very boldly. He declared, "Lord Vishnu alone possesses the highest transcendental qualities. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead." So this is Brghu Muni. This is that great personality, Brghu Muni. He was so highly qualified, who was so fearless, who, very boldly announced that Lord Vishnu was or is the greatest, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the irony is that in this situation that we're talking about, now back to, the sacrificial arena, Daksha, Lord Shiva, Nandishvara, and all of the wonderful personalities, including Lord Brahma, sitting in there, Brghu Muni completely loses it. Completely loses it. So why? So the Bhagavatam is basically trying to teach us that anger arising from offenses, it can affect anyone. It can affect anyone in this material world. So that's an important takeaway for us. It's not like anger doesn't happen to the great personalities, but it can happen to anybody in this material world, especially when offenses are committed. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also mentions, right? Krodad bhavati sammoha. He says, from anger arises delusion. And from delusion arises bewilderment, right? Or smriti vibhrama, right? And from bewilderment comes loss of intelligence. Smriti bhramshad buddhi nashta. So buddhi nashat pranashyati is what Krishna very clearly says. So one thing leads to the other. It is a domino effect. From anger arises delusion, from delusion comes bewilderment, and from bewilderment comes a complete loss of intelligence. Buddhi nashat. So this clearly says anger clouds spiritual clarity. Okay, we completely lose that spiritual clarity, which is so essential because we want to make advancement. It's not the other way around, right? We shouldn't be getting caught up in these circumstantial. That's why one of my god brothers would always say, a qualified devotee is not circumstantial, but substantial. Substantial meaning grounded in the Vedic scriptures, grounded in the spiritual qualities that are required, the transcendental qualities that are required to be worthy of a pure devotee, and not circumstantial. So in this case, we are seeing such a great personality even becoming prey to Maya, becoming prey to circumstance. So we have to be extremely careful. And we need to be even more careful because if this can happen to the great personalities, this can happen to anybody, right? Any one of us, especially in this material world. And when that happens, there will always be consequences. So it is not just a question of exhibiting and demonstrating these, you know, um, qualities that don't speak of a devotee, but there will also be serious consequences, right? That could happen either in this lifetime or it could happen in coming lifetimes. So we should be extra, extra, extra careful about this when we're dealing with it. And I'll get into a little more detail as we get into, into this discussion further. Now, the other thing is about getting into this whole concept of imitating exalted personalities, right? Now, Brghu Muni specifically curses those who imitate Lord Shiva externally. Now, Lord Shiva is completely transcendental, right? He's completely transcendental, but his external appearance, he's in cemeteries. He wears ashes. He associates with ghosts and demons. So in Lord Shiva's case, this is not degradation, right? But this is in other words, in Lord Shiva's case, it's complete transcendence. He's completely transcendence because he's completely detached from the material body. But as Srila Prabhupada also says, many of his followers are, trying to change their external appearance to identify themselves with Lord Shiva by, not wearing any clothes, drenching themselves and covering themselves in ashes, you know, eating flesh, living in cemeteries, performing all kinds of austerities, in these inauspicious places. So when ordinary people imitate these external symptoms without internal realization, they become degraded. And that is a terrible consequence, especially for devotees that are trying to perfect their lives. You want to move forward, not backward, right? And it's not like putting one step forward and 10 steps back. And that's also not good. So and again, Krishna also mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, right? One who externally controls the senses but internally dwells on sense objects is a pretender. He says very, very clearly, imitation, therefore, is spiritually dangerous. So real spiritual advancement is all about internal transformation. It's not about external imitation. So that's one thing that we need to be extremely careful about. Now, one such pastime that comes to mind is also, during the churning of the Milk Ocean, deadly poison emerged, right? Lord Shiva drank the poison to protect the universe. And this was possible only because he is completely transcendental. But if an ordinary person tries to imitate Lord Shiva this way, consequences are that he will die. All right, there's no question. So again, similarly, spiritual practices should be followed according to qualification and not imitation. Now, the difference between pure devotees and imitators is something that we need to discuss, because see, in the Bhagavatam very clearly describes or declares that Vaishnavanam Yatha Shambhu. So the Bhagavatam is clearly saying that Lord Shiva is the greatest Vaishnava. That is also because he is completely surrendered to the Supreme Lord. Now, Brghu's curse refers to those who imitate Shiva without devotion. So following Shiva is not the problem, but following Shiva without devotion and not being able to internalize the qualities of devotion, but rather going with the externals, is where there is a vast difference. So there, instead of genuine transcendence, there is artificial imitation, right? So externally they may appear similar, but internally they're completely different. Now, just extend that a little further. Now, in the case of saintly persons, on the other hand, this can also be true, right? Where externally they may appear to be fallen, but internally they're filled with devotion, you know. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 9. In fact, he says, even if a devotee appears externally to be imperfect, he is saintly because he's rightly situated. And there are several examples throughout the Bhagavatam, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in so many of these great, in these pastimes, great personalities. They exhibit behaviors that might strike us as, oh my God, what's going on here? How could this person do something like this? Right? There is, in Canto 11, the story of the Avanti Brahmin, for instance, he starts off with, he being rich and he being, everything in control of all the material activities, the people, the social capital that he has, the financial capital that he has, the intellectual capital that he has. He has all of these great opulences, but he becomes so proud. And as a result, he falls. The consequences are you lose it at some point in time. You go up, 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 and up, and Krishna just drops you. Doom. You go all the way down. So he has a precipitous fall to a point where he loses everything. And so this Brahman ends up getting, he becomes a pauper. He becomes, he's going from place to place. He loses everything in his life. He loses his family, his wealth, everything. And then he's going from village to village, barely eating, barely begging, and people are defecating on him, throwing stones on him, shouting insults at him. Children are laughing and, heckling and, things like that, completely bringing him down to something that's worse than the worst in the ground. But then his realizations and his humility grows in so much devotion, and he's completely absorbed in the thoughts of the Lord. So externally, he may appear to be a haggard beggar, a parasite, so to speak, but internally he was full of devotion. He had completely transformed internally. So the externals don't even apply. Take something that is a little more contemporary, and I believe I may get this wrong. I believe it was Gaurakishore Das Babaji who wanted to so focus so much on being able to chant without any disturbances and distractions and so on, that people would constantly come and bother him when he was doing his daily routine of his spiritual practices. So what would he do? He would actually literally go and sit by the latrines in a totally inauspicious, unthinkable place. And why would anyone sit in such a dirty place to chant the holy name? He would sit on the veranda of prostitutes. And so that his thinking was he could, give people the impression that, this is not the right, is not a saintly person. Let's stay away from this person. So at least that way they stay away from him and let him chant in peace. But internally, he was a highly elevated personality. He was a highly elevated devotee of the Lord. So devotion defines spiritual greatness. It's not the external appearance. Now, the other important theme that comes up is also about, how we're so caught up in this material or this bodily concept of life, right? So this material identification is also something that we need to be extremely, extremely careful about. And this also, what this leads to, and one of the symptoms is to do with being sectarian. You can see this even in this example where Brghu Muni and Nandishvara both are representing sectarian mentality, right? Because Brghu is a follower of Daksha. He was supporting Daksha and saying, okay, we're part of the Daksha faction. And on the other hand, we have Nandishvara, who's an associate of Lord Shiva. So when we identify with group, position, or ego, conflict arises. Isn't it true? We see it even today, right? We see it even today, everywhere, at work and in all the places that we are in, when we go out, we see there are factions, this party versus that party, this political party versus that political party, right? This team versus that team, us versus them. So this is the constant source or place where, conflict arises. And that's because of this sectarian mentality that we have within us. In fact, devotees see beyond all of this, right? Beyond this bodily identification. Then the Bhagavatam is teaching us unity is very, very important on the spiritual platform, being able to see everything equally. In fact, we concluded an entire weekend on the topic of Vaishnava etiquette, right? And one of the key themes that we discussed was about seeing Krishna in all living entities, right? And seeing all living entities equally. It doesn't matter whether, it's a this bodied person or that bodied person, this nationality or that nationality, this ethnic origin versus the other. Because if we don't, it's purely imitation or vidambanam. We even, spoke about that. We discussed that topic at length as well. In fact, His Holiness Rompad Swami also quoted the verse not once but multiple times and even elaborated on that verse from the Bhagavad Gita from chapter 18. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na sochati na kankshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. Right? So when we are free from this bodily concept of life, we are in the Brahmabhuta stage. That is what the definition of Brahmabhuta is when we are free from this bodily concept. And as Srila Prabhupada says, we are constantly, working from this bodily concept. It's something that right from the day we are born, we start identifying with this body. I am so and so, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, right? I'm Indian, I'm Chinese, I'm American, all of these things, nationalities, all of the things that we spoke about, all of these things come in. So it is either this or that. And we constantly are caught in that bodily concept. And Prabhupada tells us very clearly that only when we come free from this bodily concept, in fact, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma, only when we completely are devoid of this bodily concept is when the soul is truly happy. The true happiness comes when we detach ourselves, when we are devoid of this material concept. I mean, easier said than done. But that is the essential truth here that Krishna has told us, our preceptors have been telling us, and we as devotees are trying to practice, in all our dealings and in all our interactions with fellow devotees. This is something, and not only fellow devotees, but even the entire world. I mean, when you enter into the world, there's always this frustration. I get into work, it starts early in the morning for me. When I get into my daily Scrum meetings with, my teams offshore, and then here with the client, it's constant. This is not happening right. This could have been done better. You did this. And it's constant blame game going on one way or the other, right? It's all about this issue versus that issue, and again it again comes back to who you are, who I am, and who they are, all of these factions. And this is not constructive, but we don't realize it. A lot of energy is spent in that, and we never get to a resolution. And even if we do, it's a partial resolution because again it starts all over again, the following day, and it goes on and on and on and on. We don't realize, and we get burnt out. And then we wonder why we're so drained. At the end of the day, we are, saying, Krishna, please help. But Krishna's message is very clear. It's very, very, very clear. We need to introspect and we need to think about how we can get away from this entirely wrong concept the bodily concept of life. So the symptoms of Brahmabhuta are happiness. There's no lamentation. There is no wants, just pure happiness. Now, look at this materialistic society that we live in. Okay? It's constantly bombarding us with wants. I want this feature. You speak to your product owners. They want this feature to be included. You speak to the corporates. They want to acquire new companies. You have mergers and acquisitions. You have, every walk of life. Political party want more votes, right? We are literally climbing over the others to get what we want. It's all about wants. Right from the Apples to the Teslas of the world, it's all about creating wants. That's what marketing does as well. The primary objective of marketing is to create a want, even if we are not aware of the want, even if we don't know or don't, are aware of it in the first place, they create a want. And having created the want, then we are constantly running after it. We're endeavoring and over endeavoring in most cases to try and get that want satisfied. The next version of iPhone. I mean, do we really need something that has 5 cameras and megapixels that are running into whatever? No, we don't. But the way they created the marketing that comes in and plays in to our minds is basically saying, hey, you must get this. If you don't get this, it's not going to be good enough. So we get into that mindset, and that's the mind share. If you look at it in a given day, on a daily basis, this little brain of ours is constantly being pulled by thousands, if not millions, of different objects, sense objects that are clamoring, saying, come to me, come to me, come to me, come to me. And the more we give attention to these sense objects, the more we get absorbed. And that's why Prabhupada has given us this wonderful, sandwich program. We start in the morning with chanting, we're, engaging and starting our day with the right consciousness. And during the day, we do some reading. Evening, again, we do, some deity worship. And, we're again, absorbing ourselves in sadhu sangha and, devotional activities. So that way, even all of this confusion, chaos, and this creation of wants that is bombarding us dissipates. That energy, that negative energy is dissipated. It's just broken up into pieces. And that is the reason why following, Krishna consciousness is so beautiful. I mean, Prabhupada has given us a beautiful program that makes it so much more easier, if not less difficult, to deal with these kinds of material disturbances that happen to us every day, every moment of every day. Right? So I mean, there are many other things that I can mention, including, people who are in power who want to use their power because they have the power and they feel it is their right to be able to go grab other countries, other lands, do other things, which doesn't make sense. But that's the common, rut that we get into. If we start abusing what opulences we have, and everybody has qualities, everybody has strengths. But if we abuse those strengths, even on an individual basis, right? We may not be the best cricket player in the world. We may not be the best leader in the company, but we are all individual contributors. We do have our individual strengths, and those strengths are given to us by Krishna. But if we don't use them in his service, and we're only doing that to satisfy our trivial wants, our material wants, we end up losing all of that. And the consequences are great. So when you come to the platform of Na Sochati, not identifying with this body, and then that is when Sama Sarveshu Bhuteshu, that is when we can actually see living entities the way they should be. With Krishna, acknowledging that Krishna is also present in each and every one of them in the Paramatma form. Okay. So the next one is to, we should also talk about how external symbols, right, that are being adopted by, when you look at externalities that are exhibited by people and trying to, we spoke about imitation, but then also focusing on internal purity is also very important, right? So we started getting into that discussion just to take it a little further. So spiritual life is not about appearance, right? It's about consciousness, and that's what Prabhupada very, very aptly, coined our movement as Krishna consciousness. It is all about changing the internal consciousness in, favorably towards Krishna. How do we apply ourselves in service to Krishna in a way that our entire life is transformed? Not just our externals, but internally, which is where the strength comes from, right? The core. That's when we are in alignment with our constitutional position. Swarupena Vyavasthiti, right? What is our constitutional position? The soul is directly aligned with Krishna. And being in that position is what we want to get to. That is perfection, where we can do and think everything that we do and everything that we think is in constant service to please Krishna. That is the fundamental principle, pleasing Krishna, right? That can happen only when we're aligned with our soul. Unfortunately, our mind, our body, everything is pulling away from the soul. And we end up being in the situation that we are, right? So that requires humility, it requires surrender. And that also comes from service. When we apply ourselves truly, right, when we do our services too, rather than going through, our services mechanically, we should start building and inculcating that service mindset. That is so important. We get caught up in, the interactions and the circumstantial challenges that happen when we engage even in services in and out of the temple. And I want to emphasize on that because this is even more relevant to us as practicing devotees because we are performing services. We cannot be sectarian. Remember, we spoke about being sectarian. We cannot say that, oh, that is the workplace, this is the temple. No, our lives are completely entrenched in all of these. They're intermingled, right? So when this is happening in a fashion that is so intermingled, we're in the temple during the day, we go for darshan, we come out, we're going to work, we're taking a call, we're coming back for certain services. So all of these things that are happening, they're all intermingled, which means our consciousness has to stay on track. Our consciousness has to be fixed. It has to be directed in a way that we are always on the platform of humility and the platform of surrender. We always need to remind ourselves, am I doing it in a way that is pleasing to Krishna? Guru Maharaj would always stress on the basic and very fundamental, most important principle, which is no matter what we do, it has to be done in a way that is pleasing to Krishna. Otherwise, it's a pure waste of time. Pure waste of time. You can chant 100 rounds, 108 rounds, whatever the magical number is, but if it is being done mechanically, it is useless. You could be engaged in services, even in the temple, and say, hey, I'm doing these services to yourself. Okay, you may not even say it to the others. But if those services are not being done with the true feeling of, hey, it is not about me, I'm totally insignificant, but I'm doing this in a way that I can please, even the little that I'm doing, I'm pleasing Krishna. If I can get that feeling to be sincere, coming from the heart, not calling for any expectation, not calling for any recognition, not calling for. And so when that happens, insults, humiliations, things going well, not going well, coming to you will then become very insignificant. And in fact, when we do this on a regular basis and we get into that mode sincerely, with all the sincerity, that's when, the happiness starts to begin. That's when bhakti starts to come in and you feel the effects of bhakti. And those feelings, those moments of intense happiness, which otherwise are very fleeting, tend to become a little more sustainable. Those tiny, 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 tiny little infinitesimal little dots are now slowly growing into little bubbles. And slowly those bubbles will start to come together and they start to form bigger bubbles. And it's not just a bubble, like the bubbles in the material world where there's boom, they go after a while. But these are actually bubbles of bhakti that are actually growing and growing in your heart, right? So we need to encourage that. We need to fan that spark, as our preceptors tell us. So that comes with sincerity, with that sincere surrender that I'm trying to please Krishna. So to be able to do that, there is a very, very, very important aspect, a very important consideration that we should also discuss. And I kept that for the last because it is the most important, at least in today's discussion. Again, I should say, qualify that again. Not only in today's discussion, but in our daily lives, in our practicing devotional lives. As practicing devotees, this is something that we always need to keep in mind, which is how to retain and not only accumulate, but also retain, sustain our spiritual wealth. Spiritual wealth. Now, why do I say that now? As we are performing our services, as insignificant as they may be, Krishna is constantly remember. I mean, he keeps that in mind. It's not like he forgets anything. It's not like he's not noticing it. So, knowingly or unknowingly, we are, as we're engaging in services, we are accumulating wealth, spiritual wealth, right? It's not about our bank balances, as we always say that. It's not about that, but it's about our spiritual wealth that we are constantly um, accruing through our services. But that spiritual wealth can also very easily be completely eliminated if we commit offenses. And so we should be extra, extra, extra careful in terms of how we relate to the holy name, Nama, the Dhamma, the holy places, right? Our seva, the way we perform our services, and sadhus, how we interact with other saintly persons, our God brothers and God sisters. Now, Daksha made a great, great mistake by offending Lord Shiva, right? And what were the consequences? The consequences were severe. Daksha the Great, the most handsome, the most effulgent, ended up having his head decapitated. It was gone. Not just decapitated, that head was thrown into the sacrificial fire. It was gone for good. And he ended up getting the head of a goat. So all his vanity was also gone with that. His beauty, his effulgence. Of course, Daksha then repented, although not for too long, but all of that happened. But still, he ended up with the head of a goat, right? Because he had offended someone like Lord Shiva. In fact, that is one of the devotees' qualities where we should be extra, extra careful, no matter how great or how simple or how much of a novice the devotee is in their practice. We have to be respectful. We have to be respectful. We have to be humble, right? It's not about us. Being able to think empathetically on from the other side, being able to serve, being able to inspire, being able to also bring them, elevate them to a certain level through our own actions, not by pointing fingers and saying, this is what you should be doing, but by inspiring others through our own actions and setting an example, being exemplary. So the Bhagavatam very clearly instructs us that when A person mistreats great souls, his lifespan, his opulences, his his reputation, his possessions, they're all destroyed. But look at the flip side. When one is favored by saintly devotees, they advance so rapidly towards perfection, right? So displeasing devotees and other living entities for that matter, in fact, saintly devotees particularly, they go into a tailspin. It's a downward spiral, so they enter the phase of degradation. But if one can actually get the blessings of saintly persons, please the saintly persons, then it basically elevates them and it increases their or accelerates their path to perfection, right? We all heard about the Muni's pastime with Amrish Maharaj, right? So what happened? He was disrespectful to Amrish Maharaj. He was completely in that moment. The Muni had completely made, insulted, and humiliated Amrish Maharaj, who was not only a phenomenal king and a king of importance, but also a great devotee of the Lord. I ended up having the Sudarshan Chakra follow him through the universe at phenomenal speeds to be able to, to come towards him to knock his head off. And when Durvasa Muni went to the Lord, what happened? Lord Vishnu said, sorry, I am completely under the control of my devotee. There's nothing. If you upset my devotee, you're gone. Name bhakti pranashyati. So please go ask for forgiveness from Amrish Maharaj, who's a great devotee of mine. Only he can save you. And so he does. Durvashmani goes and offers prayers and he repents and he's very, very, very sorry for what he's done. And Amrish Maharaj, of course, being Amrish Maharaj, forgives him right away and offers his respects to his spiritual master. And so we know how that happens. So the Lord is always protecting genuine devotees. So we don't have to worry about, being impacted, being affected by the other side. Because the Lord is constantly there. Krishna is taking care of us. It's between us and Krishna. If we are doing everything to please Krishna and we are automatically in Krishna's protection, we are in his shelter. And when we are in his shelter, protection is there, period. It's a default. It's a default. There's no question. There's no reason for us to explicitly ask Krishna, please give me this or give me that. Can you defend me against this person or this situation? Krishna has taken care of it already. The shelter comes with the protection intrinsically, period. Right. So, pride and envy, as we discussed over the weekend as well, and we've been hearing that constantly, that is something that can cause us to commit Vaishnava aparadh. So we should be extra, extra careful, and that's what I'm coming to now, is Vaishnava aparadh is very, 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 very dangerous. So there are, like I said, offenses against the holy name, offenses against the dham, offenses, in our services, the way we perform, and offenses against the sadhus. But among these, offenses against the sadhus or Vaishnava aparadh is the most serious, most offensive. So we should be extra, extra, extra careful about, not committing something like that. So the only way we can do that is through humility, inculcating that sincere feeling, inculcating that sincere quality of humility, which is, exhibited always, always. It shouldn't be during this moment or that moment or with this person or that person, this faction or that faction, this service versus that service. It doesn't matter. We should constantly be in a state of humility, starting with our chanting, right? So that softens the heart. And when the heart gets softened, it opens up. You're able to remember Krishna. You're able to remember, the things that we are learning. So much is being given to us. So much is being given to us through Srila Prabhupada's books, through his translations, through all our, the sacrifices that our spiritual masters are making, going from place to place to place, giving up everything, doing everything that they can in spite of all the inconveniences of airports and planes and people and circumstances and time zones. In spite of all of that, they're making these sacrifices for us. They're not asking for anything in return, never, other than engaging in Krishna consciousness. That's the only one simple ask. So we need to reflect on these things as we go through the day. We get caught up in all the craziness and the chaos, but take a moment, just take a moment. And this applies to me as well. I get drained by the time I get back from work every day. But then, even taking a moment to reflect on where we are and where we're headed is so, so, so important. As Guru Maharaj would say, you turn on your GPS, but if you don't tell your GPS, in fact, nowadays Teslas also have a lot of FSDs, right? But if you don't give a destination, the car is only going to go, and drive by itself, but you don't know where it is going to drive. Similarly, the GPS is going to ask you, where do you want me to go? Where do you want me to, where do you want me to take you to? So that destination has to be very, very clear for us. Our goal has to be very clear for us. It's not only our prescribed duties are very important. Material goals, because we are living in this material world, they happen. We need to be able to still meet our deadlines and so on. But the ultimate goal has to be very, very clear. I mean, that is fixed. That doesn't change whether it is today, tomorrow, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. That goal is always going to remain the same. That doesn't change. Pleasing Krishna, being able to get into devotional service in a way that is completely pleasing to Krishna in every walk of life, every moment of our lives. Okay? So, wrapping this up, so these two verses invoke very deep introspection. We must ask ourselves, am I cultivating genuine devotion? Or am I attached to these external identities? I am this, I am that. Am I becoming humble? Am I becoming humble, or am I becoming proud, even with not only material but spiritual advancement? A few years of being in Krishna consciousness, okay, am I, a senior devotee? Am I, this or am I that? Do I have a title? Do I get entitled because of what my service is all about? And people, are looking at me and giving me these respects. Am I honoring other devotees, or am I judging them externally? Right? A mind is so fickle, the mind is so painfully judgmental. And depending on the conditioning of our individual being, we're constantly judging people. This is not right. That is not right. This can be done better. Oh, no, no, no. This person said this to me. And it's all this negative energy which makes us even worse. We're not focusing on the right things. We're not focusing on the right things that put us in the right frame of mind to be able to do our services the way we should, right? But taking that position of humility and honoring other devotees is going to put us in that beautiful state where things that are being directed at us negatively also will bounce. It'll just go away. It won't really impact us. It won't get us, it won't get under our skin and make us dwell on that. And we all do make mistakes. It's not like we're perfect. We're not perfect by any means. We all do make mistakes, even on a daily basis. But recovering from those mistakes and moving on in the right direction is what is progress. I was watching, a graduation speech where Roger Federer, great greatest tennis players of time, was invited, and he made a very interesting comment. He said, "Look, if you look at it, I've I've won so many tournaments, so many matches, record breaking. But if you look at the statistics behind the scenes, is that I've won only 54% of all the points. Amazing, 54%, which means the remaining 46%, he was constantly making, either double faults, or he was, losing points because of mistakes that he was making. And that is what he was saying. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect 100% and right all the time, winning all the time. It is more about, once you've made that mistake, that point is behind you. Just put it behind you. Don't ignore it, acknowledge it, put it behind you, but also move forward. How can I be better from here on? I'm chanting, and I'm, on one beat to the other beat, the mind is running in different directions. You're not thinking about Krishna, and that is not the right thing to do. We need to be completely focused on Krishna. But just because, and Prabhupada would say this too, just because you missed a few beats not thinking of Krishna, it doesn't mean that you should dwell on that. And we tend to beat ourselves up sometimes, right? We're thinking, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, why did I do that? But rather focus on the next beat and say, this beat on, I'm going to be thinking and focusing on Krishna when I'm chanting. So that is very, very important as well, right? So that helps us promote devotion. And so, again, coming back, humility is a very important aspect of that. That's a starting point for our devotion. So, in short, if we cultivate humility, if we avoid offenses, and if we sincerely serve the Lord, spiritual advancement becomes very natural, it becomes very joyful, very real. It's no longer sitting on books in the shelves. It's not some high ideal, but it is something that becomes very natural to us. So, with that, I'd like to close the class, unless there is some discussion, there are some questions. I know I went 8 minutes over time here.